Welcome along to this deep dive. Today we're unpacking quite a mix, actually. It's from a recent De Telegraph YouTube transcript.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground, doesn't it?
It really does. We've got personal stories, look at European politics, some pretty heavy stuff on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
The whole decolonization idea, and even shifting gears completely, a tribute to a Dutch football legend.
Exactly. So quite the range. You see personal takes right alongside, big political analysis and news bits.
It's interesting how they all kind of feed into each other in the original conversation.
Right. So our mission here is basically to sift through all of this and pull out the most significant, maybe surprising bits for you.
Give you a good handle on it without you having to wade through everything yourself.
Precisely. Okay, let's dive in. It looks like Europe, specifically the EU's COVID recovery fund, was a major starting point.
It was. We're talking, what, 650 billion euros? A huge sum.
Huge. And the transcript mentions this recent report that basically asks, where did all that money actually go? How was it used?
Yeah, the lack of clear accounting seems to be a real issue. It's not clear what the impact has been.
And concerns pop up about, potential misuse, especially maybe in southern European countries like Italy.
Right, and the conversation contrasts that with how things are or are perceived to be in Northern Europe, like the Netherlands, which put in 4 billion euros. There's a sense of maybe more accountability up north.
And there's a specific example mentioned, isn't there? Something about a column by Anna Dijkman.
Yes, in the Financial Dagblad. It detailed some project, I think in Sicily or Sardinia, got a lot of EU money, but the results, well, they seemed pretty questionable.
Right. It really makes you wonder about the oversight, doesn't it?
It does. And apparently the Dutch Court of Audit also weighed in quite critically on the fund's transparency overall.
So tracking where the money went and what it achieved is proving difficult. That seems to be the gist.
And what's interesting, or maybe concerning, depending on your view, is the suggestion that the EU might even be looking at new projects.
Before they've even properly evaluated this massive recovery fund.
Exactly. Which, raises questions about their priorities, maybe learning from past efforts.
This whole situation seems to lead the speaker in the video to a pretty strong conclusion.
Ah, yes. The Nexit idea.
Yeah, that the Netherlands should just leave the EU. The speaker acknowledges it's not the majority view, but...
But the argument hinges on national sovereignty, right? The idea that the Netherlands should be able to make its own key decisions independently.
It's about self-governance, basically.
Yeah.
Keeping decisions that affect Dutch people, in the Netherlands.
And there's also criticism aimed at unelected EU figures. Ursula von der Leyen gets mentioned.
Right, and this feeling of EU overreach in Ukraine, how they handle so-called right-wing populists. There's a definite frustration there.
It taps into that ongoing debate, doesn't it? The
Yeah.
balance of power between Brussels and the member states, democratic accountability.
The euro gets a mention, too. The argument being it hasn't really benefited ordinary citizens.
Maybe businesses, yes, but not necessarily the average person's wallet.
It's presented as this trade-off, yeah. And the speaker seems pretty pessimistic about fixing the EU.
Suggests it's kind of unreformable, that even the new Dutch government might just end up following EU directives anyway.
It's a deep skepticism about the EU's ability to change fundamentally.
And interestingly, they touch on England, mentioning a resurgence of something called knowledge.
Yeah, described as being like Brexit, driven by similar concerns, immigration, national sovereignty.
So these feelings aren't just confined to the Netherlands. It's a wider European tension, it seems.
Okay, so that's the European angle. The conversation then shifts, quite naturally actually, to immigration, national identity, cultural values.
And this is where it gets quite complex. The idea of a volk comes up.
Yes, a nation or people, shared history, territory. But the transcript notes this is often just labeled right-wing rhetoric.
Which sort of shuts down the discussion about what defines a nation in today's world, doesn't it? Especially with diverse populations.
And it raises concerns about large-scale immigration from, as the transcript puts it, different tribal cultures, where loyalties might primarily lie elsewhere.
It touches on that really difficult question of integration, how you foster a shared identity when people have strong existing group affiliations.
There's a concrete example given a report from the Schildersvik in The Hague by Jeroen Holtrop about Dutch flags on Liberation Day.
Ah, yes, the interviewee who said they'd rather fly a Palestinian flag.
Exactly, citing solidarity with their Ummah, the global Muslim community, and feeling no connection to Dutch holidays.
It's a stark example of just different senses of belonging, isn't it?
And there's another example, a Flemish politician, NVA, but of Turkish origin, taking a strong pro-Palestinian stance.
The point being made seems to be that these group loyalties can sometimes run deeper than, say, political party lines or even national identity.
Identity is layered, complex.
Definitely. People juggle multiple allegiances.
The transcript also notes this perception that some immigrant communities lack a deep connection to Dutch history or culture, beyond just finding it a comfortable place to live.
Sort of a transactional relationship. It raises that question of what integration really means. Is it just living somewhere, or is it engaging with the history, the culture?
But then it contrasts this with Iranian immigrants.
Right, who often seem to embrace secularism and are sometimes quite critical of Islam. It shows you can't paint everyone with the same brush.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Avoids generalizations. And Keyvan Shabazi is mentioned.
The former Iranian political prisoner, yeah. Nominated for the Pim Fortuyn Prize.
Praised for speaking out about threats to Western values. He's presented as someone who is connected with and defends Dutch norms.
A sort of counterexample showing immigrants can be strong advocates for their adopted country's values.
The conversation then stresses the importance of newcomers, understanding the traditions, the holidays of their new home.
Compares it to the U.S., the emphasis there on the flag, the anthem. It's asking for a level of cultural buy-in, I guess.
Raises questions about different models of integration, doesn't it? How much shared identity is expected or promoted.
Then the discussion takes a more ideological turn.
Yeah, criticism of cultural Marxists and left-leaning parties.
Accusing them of undermining national pride, dismissing patriotism.
It's a view that blames certain ideologies for a decline in national feeling, favoring multiculturalism over cohesion. Cultural Marxists is a loaded term, often used in that context.
And specific media figures get named Marcel van Roosmalen, Guys Grontman.
Portrayed as always criticizing Dutch culture, but maybe hesitant to criticize Islam.
Highlighting what's seen as an inconsistency, yeah, that some groups get less scrutiny.
And this leads to an interesting idea, that constantly running down your own culture makes newcomers question its value.
And makes it harder to expect respect from cultures that maybe have a stronger sense of their own worth. It's about the perceived confidence of the host culture.
Interesting point. It suggests that maybe a strong national identity helps integration, fosters mutual respect.
The speaker in the video definitely argues for protecting Dutch culture, seeing the EU's cultural relativism as undermining it.
It links back to Nexit again, the need for sovereignty to protect culture.
And wraps up this section by noting the lack of a strong, unifying European identity.
Yeah, no real emotional connection to the EU flag for most people compared to national flags. National identity still feels primary.
Deeply rooted attachments.
Right. So, having covered Europe and identity, the conversation then pivots to, well, a much heavier topic. The Israel-Palestine conflict and its global ripple effects.
Yes, and the Dutch foreign minister, Henke Bruinslot, comes into focus, though she's called Caspar Veldkamp at one point.
Yeah, seems like just a slip of the tongue in the original audio. But the focus is on the Dutch government's stance towards Israel.
And there's a clear concern voiced in the transcript that the government, even with the PVV involved, might be moving away from a strong pro-Israel position.
The International Criminal Court's suggestion about Netanyahu potentially being arrested if he came to Europe.
And the initial Dutch reaction to that seems to worry the speaker.
It's that messy intersection of international law, diplomacy, national policy, especially with this conflict.
And then there are reports mentioned about the Netherlands and France maybe pushing for sanctions against Israel over the West Bank.
Apparently without full cabinet discussion. That adds to the speaker's unease. Strong disapproval is expressed about this perceived policy shift.
It points to possible internal disagreements within the Dutch government, maybe questions about the decision-making process on these critical foreign policy issues.
The media's role also gets discussed. The feeling of a constant flow of negative reports about Israel.
Suggesting a perceived imbalance? Yeah, that's a common point raised in this debate, accusations of media bias flying both ways usually.
And that smoke bomb incident during the commemoration with the Polish PM.
And the response from Amsterdam's mayor, Femke Halsema, emphasizing the right to demonstrate.
The speaker interprets that as a sign of declining respect for national values, for important commemoration days.
It becomes a flashpoint for that debate. Right, to protest versus respect for national moments, especially historical ones.
Then things take a really dark turn with an anecdote about a social media post.
Ah, the online clothing shop owner selling anti-Israel t-shirts.
Yes, and this person apparently used an incredibly offensive racist slur against people of Indian origin.
While trying to somehow link it all back to Israel and Jews, it's just bizarre and hateful.
Utterly bizarre. A shocking display of prejudice, really. And what's noted is the person seemed aware of censoring Israel, using I.
But not the racist slur. It shows such a warped understanding of harmful language.
Absolutely. The hosts in the original video condemn it strongly, pointing out how it feeds that vile, it's all the fault of the Jews Israel narrative.
It really highlights how insidious those anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are, and how they can just pop up in these awful, unexpected ways, latching onto conflicts.
And the transcript mentions these ideas spreading on platforms like TikTok.
Right, and how hard it is to reach people in those online bubbles with facts or counter-narratives. A real challenge for combating misinformation.
The echo chamber effect. There's also a brief mention of a historical context.
Yeah, about some historical racism against Hindustanis from certain Muslim groups, viewing them as collaborators, just adding another layer possibly relevant to that specific incident.
Okay, shifting focus slightly within the conflict, the conversation turns to Gaza itself. Reports of a potential Israeli plan for, well, permanent occupation after clearing Hamas.
Which immediately raises huge humanitarian red flags, obviously. The potential displacement of nearly 2 million people.
Massive ethical and political questions about Gaza's future, regional stability.
And there are contrasting narratives discussed about the situation in Gaza. Mainstream media often focusing on severe civilian suffering.
But then Leon de Winter's column in The Telegraph is mentioned, suggesting maybe some photos of malnourished children were manipulated.
That adds a layer of skepticism, questioning the portrayal in some media. It highlights how contested information from conflict zones always is. Verifying things is incredibly hard.
Definitely. And the suggestion of manipulated photos is, well, ethically serious if true.
Then there's input from Ralph Deckers living in Tel Aviv.
Right. His perspective seems to be that while a lot of aid did get into Gaza, supplies might be dwindling now. But he doesn't see widespread famine as likely from his vantage point.
Offers a more, maybe nuanced picture than the most extreme reports. Acknowledges difficulties, but maybe pushes back against the absolute worst predictions.
The speaker in the video clearly feels the media generally leans towards the Palestinian narrative, critical of Israel.
Which, again, reflects that polarization. People see bias depending on their own stance.
Egypt's role, or lack thereof, in opening its border is also pointed out.
Yeah, the reluctance of neighboring Arab states to take in Gazan refugees, complex reasons behind that, of course, security, economics.
And the sheer difficulty Israel faces with Hamas is discussed. Given the level of animosity, the indoctrination.
Thinking back to the celebrations after October 7th, mentioned in the transcripts, it paints a really stark picture of the obstacles to any kind of peace.
Long-term challenges, given the depth of feeling and extremist ideology.
But the conversation also acknowledges problems on the Israeli side. Extremist elements calling for expulsion of Gazans, settlement expansion.
And problematic behavior by some settlers in the West Bank is mentioned too. So it's not presented as entirely one-sided.
No, it shows an awareness of internal Israeli complexities, the need to critique actions there too, even while perhaps supporting Israel's right to defend itself.
That stance is kind of reiterated.
Right.
Support Israel as a democracy fighting terror, but remain critical of extremist elements within it.
Trying to find that balance, distinguishing the state from specific groups or actions.
There's skepticism about Donald Trump's claims he can just fix it all quickly.
Understandable caution about easy solutions from outside actors for such a deep-rooted conflict.
And a big concern highlighted is the growing global perception that Israel might be committing war crimes.
Yeah, the worry that this could erode international support, even for Israel's basic security needs. Maintaining legitimacy is crucial.
There's a comparison made with post-WWII Germany.
And how different narratives of blame and victimhood affect recovery. Germany's acceptance of responsibility versus perhaps a different narrative in the Palestinian context makes rebuilding and reconciliation much harder.
Compelling comparison. Then there's that disturbing video mentioned of Houthi militants in Yemen.
Celebrating destruction, vowing to defeat the Yahud, the Jews, just reinforcing how widespread that hatred is in parts of the region.
Stark, yeah. And the irony is pointed out, Yemen facing famine, yet having resources for weapons to attack Israel.
Tragic illustration of skewed priorities, choosing conflict over basic human needs.
A contrast is drawn between Gazans and Arab citizens of Israel.
Many of whom are integrated, prefer life in Israel, even serve in the IDF, challenges that monolithic view of Arab sentiment.
Right. But the conclusion on this whole section is pretty bleak, isn't it?
Yeah, basically saying there's no clear solution in sight. The hatred is too entrenched. The idea of changing the minds of 2 million Gazans seems impossible.
So the likely future for Israel is seen as more walls, more security, constant infiltration threats.
A future of managing threats, not resolving the core conflict. A grim outlook.
And the final thought is that the current situation, conflict, population growth, some expansionist aims, it's just unsustainable long-term.
Underscoring those deep demographic and political drivers that make a lasting peace seem so elusive.
Wow, okay. That was intense. A really deep dive into that conflict and its ramifications. The transcript then, thankfully, shifts focus again.
To a different kind of battlefield, you could say. The intellectual one.
Exactly. Decolonization, the Western world, viewed through Martin Boudry's new book.
Right, a shift from geopolitics to ideology.
And Boudry, known as defending the Enlightenment, apparently expressed shock at reactions to October 7th.
As a progress optimist, yeah. He was surprised some left-leaning colleagues didn't just flat-out condemn Hamas's brutality.
And that reaction kind of kicks off his look at decolonization theory. He sees a tension there between progress and maybe justifying violence in a decolonial frame.
The transcript talks about how influential decolonization theory is now academia, media, intellectual circles.
Presented as this major framework that sees global problems largely stemming from Western colonialism.
A really significant paradigm shaping how people view history, power, inequality today.
And some examples of its reach are given, connecting it to slavery, Black Pete, even mathematics.
Yeah. The mathematics claim, allegedly from Sylvana Simons, is mentioned as showing how broadly, and sometimes controversially, the theory gets applied.
It highlights those more contested interpretations. The transcript links this thinking to postmodernism, too.
Undermining objective truth, yeah. Thinkers like Foucault, viewing liberal democracy just as another power structure, provides the philosophical roots for the critique.
And the suggestion is that minority groups then adopted this cultural relativism, the West is guilty narrative.
Using it strategically, the argument goes, to demand decolonization, a shift in power.
Framing it as an intellectual tool used by marginalized groups to challenge the status quo, seek redress.
This then manifests, according to the transcript, in woke ideology.
Where Westerners are told to be quiet, defer to marginalized views, sometimes even question basic facts. That's the critical take presented.
Yeah, characterizing it as a kind of relativism that prioritizes subjective experience over objective truth. A critique of certain social justice trends.
And Israel's role in all this, it's seen as symbolic.
A Western outpost, yeah. So it becomes a target within that anti-colonial, anti-Western framework.
And the anti-Western feeling often behind anti-Israel sentiment is discussed, sometimes linking into anti-Semitic tropes about Jews controlling the West.
Exposes that dangerous overlap, how anti-Israel views can be fueled by old conspiracy theories about Jewish power.
The transcript even posits a potential strategic goal behind all this.
Undermining Europe, maybe with Islamist help, eliminating Israel, paving the way for a whole new global power structure. It's a pretty stark interpretation.
A radical vision, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's that really disturbing inversion mentioned.
That Jews, historical victims of racial ideology, are now somehow seen by some as the new Aryans to be opposed.
It's just perverse. Highlights the dangerous extremes these ideas can reach.
And the speaker in the video worries these ideas are now deeply embedded in Western institutions, political parties.
Making them hard to challenge effectively. That's the concern.
There's a brief mention, though, that revolutions often consume their own.
A cautionary note. Potential for infighting within these movements.
Yeah.
But also the danger of Islamists gaining more power in the chaos. Unpredictable outcomes.
A pragmatic warning, perhaps, that these alliances might not be stable and things could go in unexpected directions.
Well, that was another heavy section, diving into some really complex, sometimes unsettling intellectual currents. Let's shift gears completely now.
Please, to something a bit lighter.
Yes, definitely. The transcript takes a moment to remember Whoop Vendale.
Ah, the footballer. A nice change of pace.
Yeah, the former Feyenoord player, passed away age 77. And his big moment is highlighted the 1970 Intercontinental Cup final.
Against Estudiantes, he scored the winner, didn't he?
He did. And the transcript recounts that famous story.
The glasses.
Exactly. An Argentinian player steals them, breaks them during the match.
And he just carries on playing without them. Iconic. Real grit.
It really is. A legendary moment in Dutch football. And apparently the actual glasses are in the Feyenoord Museum now.
Oh, brilliant. A tangible link to that bit of history for people to see.
Nice touch. And the speaker in the video adds a little personal memory.
Of watching the final as a kid.
Yeah, deciding on his own to turn the TV on to watch it. sees it as an early sign of his, independent streak and passion for the game.
A nice relatable touch. Connects the big event to a personal moment.
And it ends with a slightly poignant reflection, doesn't it?
On former players passing away too young, and, well, on the hosts themselves getting older.
Brings a human touch right at the end of that segment, a reminder of time passing.
Shared memories for a generation, yeah.
So that brings us towards the end of this, well, very wide-ranging deep dive. We've definitely covered a lot of interconnected ground.
We certainly have, from EU finances and accountability
to the deep complexities of Israel-Palestine, the ideological battles underneath.
And even a bit of football nostalgia.
Exactly. Our hope was to give you a good, solid understanding of these issues, pulling out the key connections and insights from that original conversation.
Making sense of a complex mix, hopefully in an accessible way.
Right. And with that, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to take away.
Go on.
Well, thinking about everything we've touched on, national identity, sovereignty debates, these intense international conflicts, the power of underlying ideologies, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing, let's say, Western societies in the next few years?
That's a big question.
It is. And maybe, crucially, what role can just informed critical thinking, our own thinking, play in helping us navigate all this? Something to chew on, perhaps.
Definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Well, until our next deep dive, thanks for joining us.